Inside the porcelain rim of the cup, a single drop of tea drifted upward. Elias Thorne watched it hover, a golden sphere mocking the crushing physics of the Krell flagship. My sensors registered the anomaly immediately, yet the Terran simply leaned back in his chair. Gravity in this sector of the Void Crown usually snapped human femurs like dry kindling. Beneath the obsidian arches, the air felt thick enough to swallow. Elias adjusted the seal on his left wrist, his fingers moving with a rhythmic, mechanical precision that seemed out of place for a man facing cultural extinction. He looked small against the towering statues of Matriarch Vora's ancestors. Small, but strangely centered. Would you walk into a den of giants with nothing but a tablet? Elias did. I still wonder if he knew the cost. 10 hours earlier, the spire had hummed with the tension of 1,000 dying hopes. The Krell hegemony did not negotiate. They absorbed. The decree of subjugation linking had been delivered to Terra with the cold finality of an orbital strike. Sarah Vance, her face pale on the comms, had handed Elias the encrypted data pad as if it were a holy relic. To me, it looked like a child's toy. Across the great hall, Princess Zalia stood 8 feet of violet-scaled muscle and jewelry. She looked down at the Terran with a curiosity that bordered on pity. Krell biology respected only 2 things, the weight of a blow and the weight of the law. Elias possessed neither. Yet, when the matriarch demanded the 30-day preparation period begin, it was Elias who spoke first. I require the hegemony lexicon, he said. His voice was steady, despite the way his lungs rattled. All 9,000 pages. Physical copies, if you please. Laughter erupted from the court guards, a sound like grinding stones. I watched the vibrations ripple through the massive chest plates of the warriors. You would choke on our laws before you finished the first 1,000, I thought. I was a junior warden, trained to spot weakness, and I saw plenty in his trembling hands. Krell gravity is excellent for my posture, Elias remarked, ignoring the mockery as he stood up. He began to walk toward the training ring. Each step seemed an agonizing labor, his breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. I logged it as immediate physical fatigue, the human heart failing under the 4G load. He was already dying, and the integration bonding hadn't even truly begun. Inside the ring, Cord did not hold back. The first strike sent Elias skidding across the reinforced floor, his ribs groaning under the impact. He rolled, gasping, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. He wasn't fighting back. He was simply existing, his eyes darting toward the wrist seals he kept tightening. From my observation post, the data pad sat on a nearby bench, its screen dark and unreadable. Elias reached for it between every bout, his fingers smearing blood across the glass. To my Krell eyes, it was a pathetic display of a primitive clinging to a memory of home. The sovereign pact is a myth for dead worlds. Matriarch Vora hissed from her throne. Elias didn't answer. He just stood up again, his breath whistling through his teeth in a strange, controlled hiss. He looked at the 9,000-page lexicon being hauled into the room by 6 droids. Behind the exhaustion in his eyes, something else flickered, a pattern emerging from the chaos. The metallic thrum of the ship's recycler became a constant, suffocating companion. I watched from the shadows of the lower decks as Elias Thorne worked alongside Lonnie. The Krell technician was twice his size, her 4 hands moving in a blur of plasma welding. Yet, it was the Terran who pointed to a microfracture in the primary cooling line, his pattern recognition finding the flaw before the ship's sensors could. Through the corridors, the whisper of his reputation moved like a slow-burning fuse. The lower castes began to watch him, their rhythmic chest beats silenced by the sight of a creature so fragile performing bottom-up logistics on a flagship he was supposed to fear. I logged the interaction as human manipulation, an attempt to garner pity before his inevitable failure. I was still convinced he was a broken machine, his labored, heavy breathing in the high-gravity zones a sure sign of a heart nearing its limit. 28 days passed in a blur of bruising combat and endless reading. Elias sat amidst the 9,000 pages of the hegemony lexicon, his Terran data pad glowing in the dim light. He looked like a ghost, his skin pale and his eyes sunken. Pride, I thought, was a terrible way to die. He was simply waiting for the end. On the morning of the 30th day, the Great Hall was packed with Krell elite. The matriarch sat atop the void crown, her violet scales shimmering with the expectation of a completed subjugation. Elias stood in the center, his bioadaptive suit scuffed and gray. He looked smaller than he had on the first day, a scrap of cloth caught in a gale. Matriarch Vora leaned forward. The linking begins. Give us the data pad, Terran. Without a word, Elias handed the device to the High Council. The scanner swept over the screen, projecting the Krell symbols for marriage contract and asset transfer into the air. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the hall. The Krell had won. Terra was ours. Elias straightened his cuffs and took a single, quiet breath. The linking is invalid, Elias said. The words were not a shout, but they cut through the celebration like a blade. I invoke Section 84, Subclause 12 of the Hegemony Lexicon. The Sovereign Pact. Silence. Hard and cold. The realization hit the council as the data pad's display flickered. The marriage contract dissolved into a complex legal map of Terra's scientific contributions to the hegemony from 3 centuries ago. Contributions that, by Krell law, granted the species sovereign parity. The data pad wasn't a toy. It was a Trojan horse. Enraged, Korg stepped forward, the gauntlet ritual triggered by the legal challenge to the throne. The biodome's environment shifted instantly, the air turning into a thick CO2, heavy soup designed to suffocate any non-Krell. I watched, waiting for Elias to collapse. He didn't. His shallow breathing from the weeks prior hadn't been fatigue. It was oxygen packing, a biological priming for this exact moment. Elias stood on the Korg's massive shoulder, whispering the lexicon's dead words. The massive warden roared, trying to shake the Terran off, but Elias moved with the grace of a creature that had lived in high gravity for a month. He wasn't fighting Korg, he was navigating him. In the narrow ravine of the biodome, Elias used the warden's own momentum to trap the Krell's arm in a stone crevice. He didn't strike. He simply waited until the council's own timers ran out. By the evening, the atmosphere in the Great Hall had fundamentally shifted. The Krell military elite, the same warriors who had laughed at his bruised ribs, now stood in 2 rows. As Elias walked toward the exit, they performed the rhythmic chest-beat salute, a sound like thunder rolling across a desert. The Void Crown continued its silent orbit, steel and shadow against an empty sky. Sarah Vance's digital note flickered once more on the datapad screen before Elias tucked it into his jacket. The encrypted glass caught the light of a distant star. On the floor of the hall, the 9,000 pages of the lexicon lay open, their ink final and unchangeable. Terra remained.